Hey YouTube, welcome back to Sparkstarter channel. This is part 2 of Free Energy City, the true story of East Liverpool. So just to recap, we talked about the point in the beginning, the age of salt that began in Salineville, Ohio, and the salt mines. We talked about the natural gas wells in East Liverpool and how the gas wells were used to provide a seemingly endless supply of energy to the city that was so cheap that it wasn't even metered. This is an overview of the timeline of the age of gas, with the first gas being used from the salt wells to boil salt brine. The Titusville Drake oil well was drilled in 1859. Similarly, the first gas well in East Liverpool was drilled in 1859. We had a steady 20-year production of natural gas with the Great Bonanza gas well claimed in 1877. The gas wells prospered for an additional 10 years. As the local lines began to dwindle, additional gas lines were run outside the city to more and more distant places. And then in the 1890s, the gas supply began to fail, and alternative energy sources that would power East Liverpool's potteries began to be evaluated. The pottery industry peaked in its number of kilns in the 1890s, with almost half of the U.S. pottery being made in East Liverpool. This age of free energy natural gas was punctuated by the assassination of President McKinley, which happened in 1901. And sometimes we don't know the significance of historical events until after they've already passed. This is a plot that was created by the renowned M. King Hubbard that proposed peak oil theory, and this is from his letter Nuclear Energy and the Fossil Fuels. This is a really interesting letter where M. King Hubbard advocates a transition to a nuclear power as fossil fuel resources would begin to dwindle. From that document, Hubbard offers a peak oil production of Ohio oil. Although there was no direct method for measuring the volumes of natural gas used, natural gas and oil were pretty tightly correlated in oil and gas well drilling in Ohio. So you might consider it a proxy for peak gas production in Ohio, and you see a dramatic ramp up in gas production in the 1880s in Ohio, and a peak. And that peak in oil and gas production in Ohio just happened to coincide with the assassination of President McKinley, who would be the last president from Ohio elected. Now I'll introduce the age of coal, along with this graph of energy resource use in the United States. And although East Liverpool was an early adopter of natural gas, we find that wood was actually the dominant energy source up until the 1880s, at which point it was eclipsed for the first time by a fossil fuel known as coal.
The age of coal began and perhaps ended with the city of Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, located only 50 miles from the point of beginning, was the epicenter of one of the most disruptive energy revolutions experienced to date. Now, coal had been known of and used for many years prior to the age of 1900 to 1960, but it was in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that the most intense energy feedback loop came into being. The three horsemen that allowed for the age of coal were really Andrew Carnegie, George Westinghouse, and Nikola Tesla. It was the singular innovations of these three men and how they came together that enabled the age of coal. Coal was limited, as many of the places where you could obtain it were far away from water transport. Transporting the heavy coal miles and miles to cities was impractical, and and was also limited to coal that could be collected near the surface. Steel that was mass-produced by Carnegie allowed for railroad tracks and trains could go into the regions where the coal was located and extract it. Now, trains were limited in their tonnage until you had proper ways to brake them. Westinghouse developed braking systems for trains that allowed longer trains that could carry significant tonnages of coal. And the innovation of Tesla and Westinghouse working together was electricity. And for the first time, miners could have power tools and lighting that was safe to take into the mines and allowed them to extract quantities of coal that could never have been achieved previously.
Now, steel tools allowed for increased coal mining. Better steel tools and increased coal production allowed for things like locomotives that could bring workers and equipment closer to where the coal was located. Locomotives plus coal plus better steel resulted in more steam engines. Better steam engines could be used to produce electrical power. Electrical power could allow for better mechanization of tools. It could allow for electric lighting that could be taken into the mines. It could allow for more coal. So more coal could be produced with more steel, more steam engines, more electricity. This is one of the most intense energy feedback loops that has ever been created. I'll read an excerpt from McCord's Columbiana County History. The railroads made the coal fields profitable. Before the locomotive invaded Columbiana's verdure-clad hills, where the fuel cropped out on every hand, coal had been mined in a small way for local use, but there were no facilities for shipment. All more productive coal veins were back from the river, which was the only means for transportation of the bulky freight. But the small local coal banks were open in the side of the hills, and the coal replaced the wood to a large extent in many localities. Charcoal was even made for local use at New Lisbon as early as 1808, when Gideon Hughes established his iron furnace. Indeed, up till 1905, a great deal of coal in the center of the county, in the vicinity of West Point, Madison Township, extending north to Lisbon and south almost to the river, still remained practically undeveloped, owing to the lack of railroad transportation. Efforts had been made for more than 20 years to build a railroad, which would open up this great field, but all had failed. So there, in McCord's words, really, the coal resources could not be unlocked until you had this combination of technologies working for you. But that feedback loop could not last forever. I have here some of the coal production data that runs from 1938 to 1979. You'll notice in the 1950s, the peak of coal production reached a height of 100 million tons, with the employees in coal mines reaching up to 100,000. This is for Pennsylvania. By 1960, coal production had dropped to 65,000 tons and only 30,000 employees in the coal industry. This is a reduction from 100,000 workers to 30,000 workers in only 10 years. If you're curious about the coal production and how it correlates to population, I encourage you to check out my video on Peak Pittsburgh. But you will see that there's a very strong correlation between the tons of coal produced and the number of people living in the Pittsburgh area. As the coal production peaked and declined, so did the number of people and businesses operating in Pittsburgh. This trend was similar in East Liverpool, with East Liverpool reaching its peak population in the 1950s and 60s. This population curve can be found for Cleveland, Youngstown, and Wheeling, West Virginia as well. Coal, a once thought to be ubiquitous energy source, was beginning to run out. And although it could be replaced with cleanlier options such as natural gas, the main reason many converted to gas wasn't just for cleanliness advantage, but they could simply no longer get coal delivery trucks to arrive regularly. Not long after the peak in production of coal, the Pittsburgh steel industries began to struggle as well. We hit peak steel production for the United States only a decade after we had peaked in our coal production. Coincidentally, as coal production around Pittsburgh, Ohio, and northern West Virginia began to peak and decline, a new age was about to begin. It was 1950 in America, and only a few miles from the point of beginning, where our story began, the atomic age was about to begin. A small test reactor was built at Shippingport, and for the first time since the gas bonanza of 1877, East Liverpool had the promise of free energy once again. Now, Shippingport was not just an ordinary nuclear reactor. It was a test facility for a breeder reactor. In 1954, Lewis Strauss, the chairman of the United States Atomic Energy Commission, said, "Our children will enjoy in their homes electrical energy too cheap to meter." This echoed the unlimited gas lines of 1877 in East Liverpool. And Duquesne Light, in cooperation with the Navy under Admiral Rickover's leadership, constructed and operated the first atomic power station. Now, this was a test reactor to demonstrate the feasibility of commercial nuclear power, and several cores were tested, used to generate electricity, and powered East Liverpool and the Pittsburgh metropolitan area with nuclear power. However, the third and final core used at the Shippingport experimental reactor was a breeder reactor. This breeder could take nuclear waste and other heavy uranium isotopes and turn them into fuel. The breeder reactor operated in Shippingport, Pennsylvania, just outside East Liverpool, produced more fuel than it consumed. When the core was dismantled, it had 1.01 times the amount of fuel that it started with. This reactor actually produced more fuel than it consumed. Again, an overview of the breeder reactor concept, contrasting it with conventional fission reactors. This plot was taken from the M. King Hubbard, Nuclear Energy and Fossil Fuels, which I highly recommend everyone takes a look at. So, in conventional nuclear reactors, the ones that are still in use today, we take the highly fissionable U-235. It'll make fission products, nuclear waste. It'll produce neutrons that will be fed back to creating more fission reactions and heat. Once all the U-235 has been spent into its fission products, and it can no longer yield enough neutrons to continue the reaction, whatever is left in the core is nuclear waste. In contrast, a breeder reactor would use U-235, make fission products and neutrons, produce heat, but some of those neutrons would go into producing U-238 and in plutonium-239. These could be induced into fission, producing more neutrons and heat, which then could go and produce more U-238 and plutonium-239, and can again continue to fission and produce neutrons. You could keep repeating this process, breeding more and more fuel out of your otherwise unusable uranium-238. Conceivably, this process could produce fuel while other nuclear fuels were being consumed in the reactor. And if engineering was done correctly, the end result would be more fuel in the core than when you began the reaction. However, this great experiment is the closest thing East Liverpool has come to free energy, ended in 1982. After 5 years, the core was removed and found that it contained nearly 1.4% more fissile material than it was when it was installed. So why would they stop this endless supply of energy? The problem is simply weapons. One of the essential byproducts of the breeder process is plutonium, which is exceedingly easy to make into atomic weapons. At the time, President Carter was concerned with the proliferation of nuclear weapons and saw the risks associated with nuclear weapons greater than the benefits of producing limitless quantities of nuclear power. President Carter's efforts to stop the breeder program was intended to be a way to control the proliferation of nuclear weapons. However, there's little evidence that this policy of moral persuasion had impact on other countries from doing breeder programs. In conclusion, East Liverpool, the free energy city, began its ascent from a humble frontier town to a Midwest metropolis due to its ability to find and exploit energy resources. As those energy resources dwindled or were subsequently disallowed from being used, we went from a bustling metropolis with theaters and amusement parks and commerce to a Rust Belt ghost town. The fate of East Liverpool could be shared by other cities just as easily. And although, in some sense, we use more energy than ever before, energy use in the United States accelerated up until the early 2000s and hit a plateau. However, ever since, our population has continued to increase. If we divide the amount of energy by the number of people in the United States, we see a clear trend downward. The average daily energy use of someone in East Liverpool in the 1970s is greater than the average energy consumption of an American living in the 2020s, in the 21st century. We need more energy to have the prosperous, thriving communities that once existed throughout the Rust Belt. And I hope, in conclusion, that by sharing this story, it will inspire others to be more interested in the energy history of their communities. East Liverpool was one of the first to adopt natural gas, oil, electrical power, and nuclear energy. And it was also among the first to experience the effects of energy production collapse. I hope others will hear this message and learn the story of East Liverpool. And East Liverpool might be among the first to recover from an energy collapse in an age where we can adopt new technologies.
Hey YouTube, hope you enjoyed Free Energy City, the true story of East Liverpool on Sparkstarter channel.
Behind me is the shuttered Bruce Mansfield coal-fired power plant. And in front of me, steaming in the background, is the Beaver Valley Power Station, built on the site of the Shippingport experimental power reactor. So yeah, hope you like the video. Yeah, leave comments. What do you think about East Liverpool, the free energy city? Do you think energy is the singular source of the downfall of East Liverpool?